So this is specificity, or specificity. But it's actually specificity. This was just a way to help people remember it. So this is the way it's written. It's written 1-00 is always stronger than 0-0-1, even if this was 0-0-150, right? This is 1-0-0 would always be stronger. Does that make sense to people before I continue talking? So when you have here, this is the universal selector. It has a value of 0-0-0. It has no weight. Most people think it's the same as an element selector, but it's actually not. It's 0. This is an element selector. It has the lowest amount of weight. It's 0-0-1, or if you have two of them, it's 0-0-2, whether or not you have a combinator. Because this little arrow right there doesn't add any weight to it. So if this was there or if this wasn't there, we already went over that, right? This is familiar. If you have 150 of these, it is always going to be less specific than one single class. There's a caveat to that, which is browsers actually fail. A lot of browsers fail at 254 or 255. If you put 255 selectors in front of anything, I will come hunt you down and shoot you. So there's a few reasons. Luckily, I don't own a gun, so I can't shoot anyone. And I actually realized the other day, I said, luckily, like, web developers are kind of pacifists, because I still don't understand why there's fewer web developer shootings after debugging in IE6 than post offices. I'm like, how can IE6 be less stressful than a post office? But whatever. So then we have classes. And so the weight of class is always 0-1-0, or 0-2-0 if you have two classes. So what is a class in terms of a class weight? It's not just .myClass, but it's actually attribute selectors, UI selectors, structural selectors. Any pseudo class is a class, has the weight of a class. So you see all of these, or these four, all have the exact same value. Oh, God, I should go in and click on this and be happy. Okay, then let me see if I can go down. Yeah, we can go down. Okay, so when you combine them, let's just skip that line. So when you have like 10 pseudo classes or attribute selectors or a combination of those, it is always going to be less specific than a single ID. And so there's a discussion going on about ID selectors, and you can kind of tell my opinion about ID selectors by the character that I chose, which is not a happy shark or a pretty little whale, but like an angry shark. There's a whole discussion as to whether you should use IDs or whether you should not use IDs. My take is do what is comfortable for you, but preferably don't use IDs. So I'm not saying don't use IDs. I'm saying if this is how you code and you can read what you're doing, use IDs. But use IDs. IDs are very specific, and you can't overwrite them unless you add a second ID, right? Or you reiterate the ID. So I tend to use very, very few IDs. I only use IDs for one-offs. If I'm going to do a third-party widget and have someone incorporate something into their page, I will put everything under an ID because I don't want to hit their code, right? Because if I put an ID there, it's very specific. But why would I want to only hit one section of my own page? If I want it to be a P that I want to be Arial, let's say, I want to be every single P to be Arial, right? I want my pages to look the same. So when I'm using divs, it means it's a one-off, and if I'm using several divs, it means, hey, my page is no longer looking the same. So I will give IDs in my HTML. I'll give IDs because for JavaScript, I probably just want to target one section of my page and not my whole page. So they'll have IDs in the page in the HTML, but in my CSS, I try to be as generic as possible because when I want to update one thing, I want to update the whole site. So that's my take on IDs. It's not like I'm religiously saying don't use IDs. My personal take is I try not to use IDs because they're too heavy, they're too expensive. I'm not talking about performance. They're actually a little bit more performant, but again, it's microseconds. So not worth it in terms of maintenance for me. So You can have dividus and use multiple ones, and this is what happens when you actually, yes?
I have a question.
Sure.
So I once saw an example on CodePen where somebody had 256 classes that overrode one ID.
Right.
Is that because it's overflowing the specificity?
It is. That's what I said with the exception. That CodePen was actually proving that browsers are not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And that's why I said if you use 256, I will shoot you, because you should not be putting 256. Right. In the specifications, like in the WC3, that should not be happening. But I assume it's basically because 256 is a byte, you know what I mean? And that's why that number broke it. But that should not be happening. It actually doesn't break Opera, because Opera is handling it correctly. It should never, no matter how many classes you have, it should never overwrite a single ID. And no matter how many elements you list, it should never overwrite a single class. Again, being opinionated, this is the inline style. It's a BP oil tanker. Yeah, it'll work, but it's not a good idea. So why are there inline styles? And when you look at the in the debugger, why do you see inline styles? When you look at the debugger and you see an inline style, you know what I mean. When I open that thing up on the side, the debugger. Anyone know what a web inspector is, the debugger? Anyone not know? Okay, good. So when I open up the debugger, I'll see that there's styles. If there's an inline style, I'm like, I didn't put it there. That's because the JS is putting it there. So when you're doing JavaScript, you shouldn't be doing .css, right? You should actually be doing changing classes, because that creates an inline style. When you do .css, .color, red, or display block, well, a lot of people do display none and display block, right? They just switch between the two. There's a lot of things that when they're visible, they're not display block. Like a list item is display list item. A table cell is display table cell. A span is display inline. Some other spans are inline block, because you declared it. So when you say display block instead of display none, that's not really what you wanted. You really want empty. So just change the class. Toggle classes on and off, and then you're not going to have anything showing in the style. You're going to have classes, and then you can control it, all of them, from one location. And it makes your CSS much easier to read as well. So that is my religious view on styles. And then important. That's an atomic bomb, which is even more opinionated than the BP oil tanker. It'll do what you want it to do, and it is a really dumb idea. So I do use important. Never in production. I use important when I'm not targeting what I want to target, and I'm like, is my selector not even targeting this element? So before I add 15 or 27 IDs to something, I don't add a single ID, I just put bang important, and I'm like, oh, I never would have targeted that paragraph anyways, because it's not a paragraph, it's a div. Duh, you know? So that's why I use important, then I pull it out. So important is useful, but don't put it in production, because no one can overwrite it. It's impossible to overwrite. So that being said, you guys might, if your boss tells you to, or your PM, but that's my opinion on important. So that's specificity, except for I missed the important stuff that is different. So everything I basically mentioned here is old school news, and you're like, I already knew that, why are you talking to me about it? And it's the stuff I went over earlier, and this is what I'm going to go over. The star selector or global selector has no value. We talked about that. Combinators like the tilde, greater than, and plus have no value. So this line has the same weight as this one. And if I'd done this, right, the second one would overwrite the first one because of the order. If they both had color, this one would win out. This looks like it's more specific, and it is. It's targeting more specific of an element, but in terms of the specificity, it has the exact same weight, and therefore your LIs will all be red, and they will not be blue. None of them will be blue. And then the not has no value, but the parameter does. So this right here, you're getting a 0-1-0 from my class, and you're getting a 0-0-1 from the P, right? And specificity is not inheritance. When I hit this word, I always forget what I meant by that. I guess what I mean is here, this is green because I've actually told it to be green. But if I didn't tell it to be green, and I didn't have something else telling it what color to be, I think I actually have it. It should be yellow, right? Because this doesn't actually match it. But in the header of the CSS, I have green. So that's what I meant.